First and foremost, I wanted to just thank my patrons for their continuous support. This content would not be possible without them. Dan Robichaud Carew, Tony Stunts, Generic GT, Geezer Windbag, Oleg, Jake Brabick, Carlos DeLuca, Fatlander, and Ped Dispenser. Feel free to support me on that platform, and I look forward to you enjoying this content. Alright, so first of all, I'll make something very clear. This BART series has information that's simply too extensive to put into one video. Because of this, it'll be a 5-part series that I will release in segments. This first episode is going to talk about the history of BART as well as the rolling stock. From there on, we'll go on to talking about the spurs as well as expansion plans in future episodes. To get you started, BART is an electric rapid transit, part diesel electric, and part people mover system that serves 5 counties, 50 stations, and has 130 miles of Indian gauge track, with some of it being standard gauge around Antioch. The people mover system is its own thing. This system is without question the most famous Bay Area rail agency, either for the right or wrong reasons. This series is going to delve into everything that makes BART complicated, massive, famous, and integral. On my Caltrain and Muni videos, I touched a lot on the history with municipal streetcar lines in San Francisco, as well as the pre-Caltrain commuter rail service between San Jose and SF. But I haven't really told you about the history of East Bay Rail, where the majority of the current system runs. BART is currently the only form of rail transit that crosses the San Francisco Bay using the really cool but loud Transbay Tube. Before that, we had the Key system. This was formed as a consolidation of streetcar lines in the early 1900s and ran service basically to where BART does today in some parts of the Oakland area, up to North Berkeley and even east to the Oakland Hills. But more importantly, the Key system would actually utilize the covered lower decks of the Bay Bridge to run their trains over the San Francisco Bay, marking the first time that there was a direct rail connection between the two cities. Keep in mind though, there was already a rail connection across the bay, just on the Dumbarton Bridge, much further south. But seeing the post-World War II explosion in population growth, a slow streetcar line connection connecting commuters to the growing San Francisco was just not enough. And there were plans floated around for, at the time, a second cross-bay connection that would have to be underground. This plan turned into a built-from-scratch transit system that would integrate the entire Bay Area. And so the Bay Area Rapid Transit District was formed in 1951. The original plan is just ludicrous. I mean, you had rapid transit going to Palo Alto and even Marin County. But early, Santa Clara County nixed itself out of those plans to focus on the expressway system, and this is why the Peninsula Line only went down to Palo Alto. But slowly and painfully, some counties dropped out of this rapid transit plan. San Mateo County cited that the service from the Southern Pacific, which is now Caltrain, and the fact that it cost too much money led them to pull out of the district. Also, the district was just super in love with cars in general, and citizens didn't really want to support a transit system. In a similarly spineless fashion, Marin also pulled out, since they didn't want the burden of a fancy transit district now that San Mateo had dropped out, and they would have to endure more of the costs. They also claimed that it was unfeasible to build rail rights-of-way on the Golden Gate Bridge. This is also why we don't have a Geary Boulevard subway, by the way, as there would have been a dead end to the BART subway system without Marin County supporting. But yeah, the board whittled down to just 3 counties, originally from 5. Of course, the system would basically have to be started from scratch, as the third rail technology necessitates that the system would be entirely grade separated. So BART had to have some underground parts underneath city centers, such as all of these San Francisco stations, as well as the stations in downtown Oakland. The system also planned to use highway medians, such as 980 and 24, as well as former rail rights-of-way belonging to agencies like the Western Pacific and Southern Pacific, just to name a few. The main beast of BART, though, was the Transbay Tube. This would be the keystone of this entire transit system, which was an underground tunnel connecting trains between San Francisco and Oakland. It's really the selling point of the whole BART system, and it was a daunting task. It consisted of 57 sections that combined were 3.8 miles long underneath the very muddy ground and the high water table of the San Francisco Bay. Constructing the subway stations in downtown San Francisco, even using a cut and cover method, proved to be difficult. I also mentioned this process in the Muni video, but these subway stations were 5 stories high and are double-decker with 2 vertically stacked platforms, Muni on top and BART on the bottom. Construction on the system overall was at a peak in 1969, with work being done simultaneously in 3 counties. There were a lot of financial shortfalls, mainly because these were state-of-the-art technologies at the time that the system included, including automatic train control. These costs started to add up, and the federal government really had to step in and provide funding for these shortfalls. This funding boost also made it possible to add a station to the Market Street subway in San Francisco, the Embarcadero station, which wasn't originally part of the plan. It would open up in 1976, a few years after the other downtown San Francisco stations. But finally, after these obstacles and construction nightmares, the first segment opened for revenue service from MacArthur to Fremont in September of 1971. Segments in the East Bay to Richmond and to Concord would open in sections in 1972. The year after that, the disconnected San Francisco service from Daly City to Montgomery, keep in mind, no Embarcadero yet, would open, and BART was not a connected system at the time. In 1974, finally, the Transbay 2 was opened for revenue service, and the disconnected SF and the disconnected East Bay system would finally have a common meeting ground in the middle of the San Francisco Bay, or in the bottom of the SF Bay, really. For about 20 years, this was the BART system. But by the 1990s, the Bay Area was starting to become a boom town as the draw of Silicon Valley and tech really contributed to a construction boom across the region. So it only made sense that BART would start to cater to the inner suburbs like Dublin, Pleasanton, Pittsburgh, and Antioch. At this time, BART started to plan spur lines to serve these communities, mainly using already existing highway rights-of-way instead of former rail rights-of-way, with the exception of the Concord to North Concord spur. But yeah, a lot of the stations opened in the late 90s are highway medians, and you already know that I'm not a huge fan of them. Even though they are easier to build and are functionally very convenient, it's still a disservice to passengers having to disembark and board in the middle of a roaring freeway, especially with no sound barriers. But in 1995 to 1997, the spur to Dublin Pleasanton from Bayfair and the spur to Pittsburgh Bay Point from Concord opened up. Around the late 1990s, San Mateo had its own Grinch moment and started to have a change of heart. With the completion of a turn track south of the Daly City terminus on the border of San Mateo County, it contributed $200 million to a BART expansion, and this opened up an opportunity for stations down to Millbrae. Following the above-ground right-of-way, Colma Station was opened up south of Daly City in 1996. In 2003, the extension to SFO Millbrae south of Colma was opened up, adding 8.7 miles of track, around 6 of which were underground. The extension itself cost $1.5 billion. But nonetheless, the extension opened up to the Millbrae Intermodal Station, which is a very impressive transfer between BART and Caltrain, and the only transfer at this point between the two systems. So next, we'll be talking about the couple of extensions that don't utilize the traditional third rail setup, and instead rely on either cables or just regular standard gauge tracks. Also, kind of around this time, the West Dublin Pleasanton infill station opened up in 2011, serving West Dublin. More service is better than nothing. The service between BART's Coliseum Station and Oakland International Airport was simply a bus connection for the longest time. Hoping to follow in the footsteps of the larger airport across the bay, BART, in conjunction with OAK, developed an airport connector of some sort, similar to how the main BART service connects with SFO. The plan was to build an automated guideway transit system to Oakland's airport, and so with this in mind, a 3.2-mile track connected Coliseum to a station just outside of the airport's terminal. This service opened up in late 2014 and sees a ridership of about 1,000 people a day. The extension into Antioch also utilizes a different type of rolling stock and track and is a de facto shuttle service into Antioch. Let me explain. So, BART's terminus before this extension was at the Pittsburgh Bay Point Station. It's just a regular station with service using the regular BART rolling stock. But as Antioch was growing due to the suburban sprawl, the city and BART took an interest in expanding BART eastward. Originally, the system was going to use Union Pacific's right-of-way adjacent to Highway 4, but the system took advantage of the highway expansion plans and decided to build BART in the median of the highway. But cost overruns are cost overruns, and the agency realized that building a regular BART extension using the same rolling stock and the same system used across the bay would mean that it would cost a lot of money. If the full BART build-out with electric trains was utilized, it would have cost $1.2 billion. Using a cheaper rolling stock and therefore its separate service would only cost BART $460 million in comparison. They sought the cheaper option and enlisted Stadler, which were the Caltrain manufacturers of the new rolling stock, to build their DMUs. This also necessitated building a transfer station east of the regular BART terminus a half-mile east for passengers to disembark regular BART cars and enter what are called the E-BART cars. From there, the system would serve 2 stations at Pittsburgh Center and Antioch. This 10-mile extension opened up in May of 2018. And finally, we have one more expansion to talk about in the 21st century, and the one closest to my heart, which is the Silicon Valley expansion. So initially, Santa Clara County wasn't even part of the original BART planning, and I'm really pissed off about this because San Jose wasn't even connected to BART until 2020. So this extension is all south of Fremont, but there's a pretty big lake south of it, and the trains needed to get past it, so you just build a tunnel under the lake, and there you go, mission accomplished. Then the line had to run south of the lake, going along the former rail right-of-way, all the way to Warm Springs. Because this part of the extension was already in Alameda County, it was built sooner, and the Warm Springs station opened up to revenue service in 2017. But Santa Clara County had to be delayed just a bit. They never really officially joined the BART district, and VTA would actually control this extension into Santa Clara County. The beautiful below-ground Milpitas station and the above-ground Berryessa station were originally supposed to open in 2016, but, delays happen, and they weren't open until June of 2020, right in the smack dab middle of the pandemic. Notably, at the Milpitas station, here is the system's first ever connection with the VTA light rail serving Santa Clara County via a pedestrian bridge. The entire Silicon Valley extension plan calls for an extension all the way to Santa Clara, like the city of Santa Clara, but we'll talk about this much later in the extension section. Say that shit twice again. Ugh. Extension section. Alright, so this rolling stock section is going to be pretty long because BART already has about 3 generations of rolling stock for its flagship service, as well as 2 other types of trains for its E-BART service to Antioch and its airport connector in Oakland, so try to stay with me here. So its basic and flagship rolling stock has always been an Indian gauge, and it's the only rail service in the US that uses this gauge for its rails, which makes the system super unique as the cars are very, very wide. This is very beneficial in terms of carrying more passengers, as well as some engineering physics stuff where the trains kind of have to make tighter turns. I don't know, my engineers can comment on that. But I do want to talk about the legacy fleet, which is no longer in service as of September 2023. So the first cars were developed by ROAR, and they were known as the A cars or the B cars. While all cars were self-propelling, the A cars were solely used as leading or trailing cars with a control room for the operator. B cars could be placed wherever on the train and only carried passengers. These cars could comfortably carry 60 sitting passengers, and so the capacity of each train was pretty high, especially if you're at crush load. Each car was 70 feet long and had 4 doors, 2 on each side. You can sometimes see these cars during periods where extra service is provided, and I'm not gonna lie, I get a little excited when I see that A car approaching the station. It kind of feels like dad's coming home from the store with a gallon of milk again, and I get to see him for just a little bit longer. In the 1990s, BART wanted to optimize their fleet services just a little bit, as the A cars could really just only be put on the end of the cars. Their solution was to contract Alstom to build a new type of car, the C car, that could be used as both a leading trailing car and an intermediate car. They could sit up to 56 passengers but were the same length, and these cars ended up having a ton of problems and are entirely and totally decommissioned even for extra service. And that says a lot if the cars from the 90s aren't even running anymore compared to the cars from the late 60s, early 70s. What's a pretty gross fact, and something I didn't even know because I've only taken BART very recently in my life, was that prior to some renovations in 2015, all seats were upholstered and each car was carpeted. I've thankfully never ridden a BART car that was carpeted. Not a fan. But, of course, these cars were aging, and there needed to be a replacement fleet, coinciding with the Silicon Valley expansion plans. Enter the D and E cars. Built by Bombardier and Alstom, I am so just mispronouncing everything. The D cab car and the E intermediate car comes with massive improvements, despite seating only 50 passengers each. They really emphasize standing room, which is directly at odds with the regional BART goal of seating all passengers, but with changing times comes changing ridership expectations, and so having more standing room is a more comfortable experience for crush loads during rush hour. Also, because of this, each train has 2 extra doors with 6 instead of 4 per car. Of course, this fleet began revenue service in 2018, and these are much more modern trains. Some features and upgrades include 6 screens per car with updated information and LED screens displaying the next destination, as well as the line color on the outside and on the inside of the trains. So the cable liner from the Coliseum to the Oakland airport uses completely different cable car technology, and this rolling stock consists of a generic Doppelmayr cable car that's automated. You can find these cars in, Vegas, Mexico City, and Qatar as other airport links, so it's proven technology, but they're pretty plug and play, and there's nothing super special about these specific BART cars. They're automated and they're propelled by cables, and they have a pretty good on-time rate and a capacity of 113 people per train set, which is not bad. The E-BART extension from Pittsburgh to Antioch is a different gauge. It's standard gauge, and so therefore it's incompatible with the baseline BART trains that require a different set of rolling stock. Therefore, BART enlisted Stadler, whatever the hell, to supply diesel units for the Spur. These entered service along with the line in 2018, and they're 4-door trains that carry 104 passengers. They are pretty quiet and are very comfortable with pretty good suspension. My tip for any rail fans out there is if you want to get a little taste of the new Caltrain fleet, which are made by the same manufacturer, Stadler, ride on E-BART. It's the same manufacturer and you'll get somewhat of a similar vibe on the ride, but of course these trains are 1, smaller, and 2, are only 1 level. So there you have it, the history of BART as well as the rolling stock. This was more of an intro video, and this series will follow the same format of the other videos, but of course, content will be spread out across many videos because BART is just a simply massive system that I can't cover in one. So I hope you understand, and I hope you enjoy this content going forward. Thank you to my patrons on Patreon. You can support me on that. You can follow me on Twitter, and I actually have a Discord now, so feel free to join it. We can chat about rail stuff or just whatever. But yeah, thank you so much if you've made it this far. I look forward to sharing more BART related content for this series, and I'll see you next time.